So welcome to today's show, everyone, and we're excited to introduce you to our guest today, who is Tobias Hofmeister, who is a community designer, hyperconnector, and serial entrepreneur. His current ventures focus on embodiment, spiritual entrepreneurship, and community design. Now, the core of his work is at the intersection of design thinking, innovation, and psychological safety, wearable technologies, flow, and human potential. He has met thousands of people in heart-to-heart dialogues when traveling over 30 countries, earned degrees from 4 universities, published dozens of academic papers, presented his research at international conferences, and worked for the world-leading sustainability and digital research organizations. Now, he has been a contributor to House of Beautiful Business, Mind Valley, EverCoach, and other initiatives cultivating new ways of working, fostering entrepreneurial mindsets and creating work cultures and environments that celebrate the whole human being. Tobias views business as a vehicle for self-actualization and believes that when done from a place of love and compassion, that it holds the potential for healing the world. We're just so happy to have him on the show today. So thank you for joining us, Tobias. How are you?
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
That's quite the intro. That is quite the intro. So there's a lot of different ways this conversation can flow. So before we kick off, would you like to just share a bit about yourself from your standpoint, Tobias? So if our listeners are meeting you for the first time, what do they need to know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel really like when I look at the things that I've done in my life, yeah, on the one hand, it's all like really beautiful and impressive, and there's lots of things that I'm super grateful for having experienced. And I feel for the longest time, really, it's been quite interesting because I felt like I was doing all these things, but none of these things really felt mine. You know, it felt like, oh, I need to prove myself more. You know, like what else can I do? Can I travel more countries? Can I work for more organizations? Can I, yeah, write more papers? Can I earn more degrees? But ultimately, it's like, man, like where does all this like drive come from? You know, and ultimately, I realized that it really came from a place of just not feeling seen and feeling, or if I prove myself just a little bit more, maybe have like one more awesome girlfriend or have like one more like beautiful experience for my resume, I'm more lovable. And it's just been this interesting journey where really throughout my 20s, it was like, okay, cool. And I grew up in Germany, being in a small village. And then at 18, it was like, okay, the world is open, you know, I'm going away, you know, and I'm going to the States and Scandinavia and China, South America, other parts of Europe, and it felt in a way really exhilarating and exciting. But then at the same time, like, why was I doing it? You know, and ultimately realized it's been this quest of like finding myself. And it's really, I feel, in dialogue often when, you know, we understand more about who we are, we understand more about who other people are, we understand more like how the world works. And yeah, then I feel really like in my mid-20s, I started having my first son, and then shortly after I had my second son. And really with that shift of becoming a father, it felt like, wow, okay, this tapped me back into kind of my own inner child and beginning that healing process. And then instead of like venturing into the world, it was okay, actually, let's venture inside. And what I really noticed is kind of healing the heart, you know, like healing that organ, energy field, whatever you want to call it. I feel that's really where my mission is. And now I'm combining all the work that I've done in innovation and entrepreneurship and engineering with really the quest inward and like, what does it actually mean to like feel and connect? And so, yeah, that's really where my work is at the moment, with combining wearable technologies with self-insight for like, how do we create the reality we live in, you know?
Nice. Wow. I love that so much. So Tobias, let me kind of just take that back a step, because a lot of our listeners are people that are potentially like kind of almost living in the way that you've described, like constantly going after that next thing, the next thing, the next thing. You know, they're performing at high levels, they're achieving incredible things, but yet there's still that something inside that perhaps isn't quite hitting the mark. So at what point did you start to perhaps notice that behavior wasn't leading to more love, or was it for you? And at what point did you then decide to ask yourself that question, well, why am I even doing any of this?
I mean, honestly, for me, I feel it came sort of like incrementally. And I mean, a big turning point for me was at the end of like 2017, when the relationship with the mother of my kids ended. And just realized like, holy fuck, you know, there's way too much externalization of like who I am, you know? And yeah, that then also gave me lots of, I mean, honestly, I feel pain and kind of like hitting these like rock bottom moments are often the most beautiful teachers in the long term. But I feel that because through this relationship, I noticed like how much I was sort of like attached to my family in some way. And then, you know, coming out of this relationship, I felt like, man, I just moved the attachment from being attached to my family to being attached to a specific woman. And then kind of like that relationship container, rather than actually realizing I really need to like attach to myself. And I think Gabor Mate really explains it beautifully. You know, he has this concept of attachment and authenticity. And as a small child, or as a human in general, we have needs for both. But if we're really, really small and like our need for authenticity threatens our need for attachment, then it's like, boom, let the authenticity slide to the side. And, you know, the attachment is the main thing. And I was just in Germany last week and, you know, speaking actually to my mom more about my very early childhood, my birth and kind of like her pregnancy and everything. It was really interesting to actually, you know, rationally now understand from like an adult perspective. Because when I was born, my heart was making some not normal sounds. And so I was born in the GDR. So it's quite interesting how kind of the system worked, you know, like the baby being born and then it gets brought out to be fed by the mother. And then, you know, it gets back into like the baby room. Yeah, then after 5 days, you know, my mom went home and I needed to stay another like 5 weeks. And so, I mean, my mom sent her breast milk, but then it was mixed with like other mothers' breast milk. And so it's really interesting, you know, because I felt like as a kid, I must have created this narrative of like, wait, I'm not good enough, you know, and I need to somehow like attach to something in order to survive. And yeah, I feel this then has kind of like driven most of my life until now, consciously realizing, wait, you know, I was always cared for. You know, there was always somebody there. Maybe not sort of like the person that, you know, brought me into the world. But then, you know, beginning to understand and kind of grieve that piece and realize that I meant to be here, you know, like that there's been like a whole system that worked for me to make me be here. It's really fascinating to reframe, and it's never too late to have a good childhood in that sense, and being able to understand, hey, yeah, actually, you know, my mom has done the absolute ultimate best that she could in the circumstances that she was in. And it's really nice actually feeling that level of connectivity and that level of like compassion. And then with that, I feel comes really a sense of like freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so interesting you make that connection with the attachment styles, specifically those, you know, very, very early moments. Because again, a lot of people that are listening to this, they might not even be aware that that's even a thing, right? They don't even realize that actually those early moments, those early months, early years really do shape the way in which we see the world. And it transpires in becoming attached to everything outside of us potentially, or fearing it and not attaching at all, right? Or avoidance and many others. So it's really important that perhaps anybody listening actually takes a bit of time to reflect on their own journey and their own relationship with authenticity and attachment, really. I would love to just pick your brains on where does safety fit into that for you and your journey specifically?
It's an interesting one because that's a really prominent piece for me right now as well.
Okay.
But you know, what I'm beginning to see is that, you know, when I was a kid, maybe like 8 or 9, I remember I had this discussion with my mom saying like, the only thing in life that is certain is uncertainty. And then so I felt there was quite some sort of like wisdom in it, but it's
that's
really
wise for 9 years old.
Also, it's interesting, like this whole safety piece, what I'm beginning to see is I've always been looking to find safety somewhere else, you know, whether it's like finding safety in relationships, finding safety in, I mean, primarily for me, it was like finding safety in the love of a woman. And it's been such a futile experience because every time I'm trying to find safety, I'm basically like completely moving my responsibility for safety to this other person. It's a very like childish experience of like, oh yeah, I'm a boy, you know, like mama take care of me, even though it's like in an adult sort of like man-woman relationship. And for me, safety is ultimately knowing that whatever emotions arise, I'll be able to sit with them and deal with them. So having a spiritual practice in that sense, I find is really important. So for me, it's chanting. But then again, also like wearable technology has been really instrumental for me to discover myself in deeper ways and actually find ways to explore like how my nervous system responds to certain moments. Because and I guess that whole piece ties into stress. When for me it really, like, stress is when, for me, the nervous system is obviously like off to the side, stuck in kind of like fight or flight mode. And then obviously I never really ever feel safe in that moment, because there's like just my physiology is like, dude, you need to like fucking run in order to actually like keep safe. But then if I'm able through breath work, for example, to be like, okay, cool, I'm feeling stressed. Now let me lie down and breathe for 10 minutes. And then it shifts that balance towards more, parasympathetic activation, rest, digest. And it's like, okay, cool. Nobody needs to do anything other than me realizing, oh, I'm stressed, and let me find a tool to de-stress. When I was younger, actually masturbation has been a really big piece to kind of like self-soothe. And that also was interesting because it, throughout like my university time, really just basically caused that, that kind of like shameful experience of like, man, I feel I was using porn in ways to self-soothe. And then once I started using wearable tech, it was like, yeah, that's why I'm using it. My body's actually like really freaking smart. It's wanting to like find balance. And when I masturbate, I breathe more deeply. Hence my nervous system centers, and boom, that's that. And then, that inside feeling was, okay, cool. Now I can just find any other modality that basically allows me to potentially breathe more deeply, to shift my nervous system back to a state of equilibrium. And I guess that's also where I feel wearable tech is super important for just understanding, like, why am I doing things that I'm doing? And so for anybody who's listening, it's really that subjective experience. And like, your body is always looking to find that state of harmony in some way. And it may do it in ways that are societally not the most appropriate or, most highly regarded. But then it's also a societal context, I mean, if you're like a workaholic, then it's like, cool, society kind of approves of that. But then, being a porn addict or sex addict, it's something that's like shameful. And it's really quite interesting also how I feel the societal frame, in a way contextualizes our experience. And then, stepping away from that to how do I perceive it? And why is my body doing it? And having that level of self-compassion, I feel, can really like heal and allow us to become more loving to ourselves ultimately.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. I think it just brings that back to, again, that concept of safety. Again, is when we need to balance our nervous system, we do these things, we breathe, we meditate, whatever, we bring ourselves back into equilibrium. But problem is with a lot of society and a lot of people, we jump straight back into that heightened state of arousal, of feeling unsafe again. Is because we've got that connection to, oh, I need to be in a different relationship, I need to feel safe, I need to be with a different group of people, I need to feel safe, I need to buy all these things because I need to feel safe, because it makes me feel good, it makes me feel safe. But it comes back down to that there's never enough out there as you can buy, you can experience that it's going to make you feel safe. It's coming back in to finding out who we are, trusting ourselves, and trusting our authentic selves, but connecting with ourselves on a much deeper level. And breath work and meditation is good to help to start that process. But I think unless we can start to change that meaning and start to change that connection between how we perceive the external world and how we actually connect with our internal world, and understand that connection to our internal is vital to our experience on the external. And that's where we feel safe, is connecting with ourselves. Is when we can feel that, then it doesn't matter what happens in our external world. We can keep our nervous system in balance. We can keep ourselves in equilibrium, we've got homeostasis. is where we don't have to rely on a girlfriend or a wife or a family or friends or a group or a job to get that sense of safety. We can trust that we have that ability within ourselves. And when you mentioned about obviously wearable tech and helping to see that of when you are unbalanced and when you are kind of out of center, I think it's a great thing to show you what you're doing, help to bring you back in again. But then it's like connecting the dots. Is what I'm doing actually serving me? Is it something that is, am I expressing and am I getting myself back into balance in a healthy way? Which means can I embody this practice? Can I embody this feeling? Or is it something that is not sustainable? Is it something that, like you said, might be seen as taboo or seen as controversial in society? And then that comes back down to that. If it's seen as controversial, is that elicits that safety response again is, oh, it's not accepted. That means I can only do it in secret. So I get that short-term relief of feeling balanced, but when I go back into my normal life and surround myself with people, I don't feel safe again because I can't do what makes me feel safe. So it's finding those practices and those things so you feel safe within your own body, wherever you are, whether you're in a group of people, whether you're in private, whether you're on your own. What's your opinion on that? What would you kind of add to that?
To me, I feel safety has a lot to do with boundaries, with the ability to know that I can say no. And whatever happens, like the emotional response of the other person, it's the responsibility of the other person. It's just like, okay, I communicate from a state of like love and respect. This is where my threshold is. And then, what happens with them happens with them. Equally, if somebody communicates something to me and it triggers me, then that is something that I need to take care of. And it comes then back to, what are my practices to move back into the state of equilibrium? Is it breathing? Is it meditating? Is it putting my feet on the ground outside? Is it chanting? Is it, doing some sort of like wearable tech measurement and realizing, okay, like how far am I off? Or is it maybe just, hopping on a bike and having a flow experience of like road cycling or mountain biking or surfing? I mean, whatever it is, or maybe it's dancing or painting or doing music. And I feel the piece of safety for me has a lot to do with basically two states of energy. Like on the one hand, it's like expansive and flowing energy, and it's great, it's vibrant in a way. But then on the other hand, like fear is this kind of contracted, like really dense energy. And a practice that I'm engaging is like when I feel these contracted and dense energies, it's really breathing into it, but then also, opening the physiology and kind of like making sounds and, like shaking your jaw and your arms. And I mean, also like shaking is actually a thing that I do quite often. It's, yeah, I mean, that's basically like what the animal kingdom does, like a deer is chased and then, okay, whatever, the like lion or whatever animal wants to eat, deer kind of like disappears, then just like shakes it off and just like goes on grazing. And I guess that's sort of the thing, like shaking and breathing. And I feel in my family that was something that, just like be in a way quite silent. So, doing kind of a deep breath was always a sign of like, oh, this person is like on edge, like don't mess with this person. And so I feel everybody started breathing quite shallowly. And it's just so interesting when I was back and I was doing some more deeper breaths and my brother was like, dude, like what's going on with you? Like and it was just interesting to notice like, wow, just a deep breath, kind of like almost like triggers others. But it's, yeah, I feel breathing and shaking.
I love shaking. I do it all the time. Shaking is the best. Yeah. It really helps change your physiology, change your state, and you just feel so much better.
I find it really interesting listening to just the last few back and forth you two have just had, because it's almost under the assumption that people actually know they're unsafe sometimes, right? And I think we have to remember that, and I point this out really because this was with my story. My journey was like, I didn't even know I was unsafe until I was just at this point where I just didn't feel like myself. I was feeling so far removed from who it is I thought I was, that it didn't feel good. That energy, that I was in a fearful state, I was feeling uneasy, but I would never have described it as unsafe. And I would never have even thought of safety in my mind. That was one of the reasons why I kind of just pegged that question there, because it's so attached to attachment styles, right? But this is why I find the wearable tech so interesting, because for somebody that is experiencing stress, whether that be kind of at that life level, during like work situations or family situations, or whether they're feeling inside their body their stress through chronic pain and things like that, or if they really know deep down that there's some heavy shame they're carrying from the past or some trauma they've experienced, no matter what the level of stress, wearable tech can help everybody. So I'd love for you to share a little bit more information on what wearable tech do you recommend for anybody who is stressed out, no matter the cause, and why it can be so powerful for them.
Amazing. Yeah, the piece really for me that helped me the most is like here, it's basically like a chest belt, and it does like heart rate variability. And I mean, there's other pieces. There's a little like clip that, you know, guides me into states of like focus, but it ultimately has all to do with breathing. And, you know, when I notice I can breathe consciously, I mean, conscious breath is like the gateway to the nervous system. But the cool thing with the chest belt is it's made, or the software that actually like runs on it and evaluates the data is made by an Austrian company. And what they have created is like basically a spectrogram called your live fire. And it takes basically your heartbeat to heartbeat kind of measures, makes a Fourier transformation. So it makes it from a time domain into a frequency domain. So you basically see kind of like the power and the spectral analysis, you know, like is your system more stressed? Is your system more relaxed? Is it quite balanced? And then you see what activities, you know, do stress you out, what activities relax you more. Like, for example, when I do chanting, I see like a relaxation. When I do breath work, I see a relaxation. When I do exercise, I obviously see intensity and stress. But then you also see like how quickly you recover. And the cool piece there is that basically by just looking at this picture, you see, you know, are there flames on it? And if there's flames, cool, there's already a good sign. If the flames are higher and more colorful, then that's better. But if it's just basically all kind of gray, then it means you're in a burnout state. And so effectively just visually gives you like a really simple starting point. And then, you know, you get a whole bunch of different numbers. And yeah, then based on that, you know, there's different typologies of like what kind of heart rate variability type you are. And then from there.
So can you explain to our listeners, what is heart rate variability to somebody that maybe have never heard that term before?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, totally. I mean, heart rate variability is really our heart is connected to both parts of our nervous system, like our fight or flight nervous system and our rest and digest nervous system. And effectively, you know, it gets inputs from either side, you know, and the fight or flight one makes it accelerate, and then the rest digest one makes it slow down. And, you know, if you're in a state of balance, then, you know, you get like a signal from your rest and digest one, and your heart beats a bit slower, and you get a signal from your fight or flight one, and your heart beats a bit faster. And then and it kind of like goes back and forth like that. Now, if you're stressed, then basically your fight or flight nervous system gives more input to the heart, and so it tends to beat faster. Now, what heart rate variability is really is like it measures like heartbeat to heartbeat to heartbeat to heartbeat. And it's not like our heart is like a metronome where it's exactly the same, but it's like one heartbeat is faster, one heartbeat is slower, one is faster, one is slower. And then so the variability is basically what is the time difference between heartbeat 1 to heartbeat 2 to heartbeat 3 to heartbeat 4. And so it's measured in milliseconds. And yeah, if you're like doing exercise, then your heart beats a lot faster. So your variability is a lot lower. And when you're just like hanging out on the couch, for example, and you're not in a like, you know, stuck stress state, then yeah, you have quite a good variability from like whatever, like 50 to 120 milliseconds. And yeah, showing that you're adaptable, you know, you're able to respond. It's not that you're super fixed, but if something relaxing comes, you can relax. If something stressful comes, you can step in and respond.
Nice, perfect. What is the role that emotions play, not just stress, but emotions on heart rate variability?
for me, like how I see is that emotions, you know, they cause like whether stress or relaxation. So it's really that I see. I mean, our system responds to stimuli. You know, whether the stimulus comes from the outside world through like a genuine threat, or whether it comes from our mind, doesn't really fucking make a difference. You know, our system responds to it. And I mean, that's why also, for example, gratitude practice is also important, or like visualizing like what abundance feels like, because effectively like our system responds to it, you know, whether we experience in the outside world or in our inside world. And so from that perspective, having kind of a handle on your emotions as much as you can is a really, really good practice. And I mean, that's where we come back to like meditation and, you know, chanting, whatever basically floats your boat, to find that level of self-insight of like, what emotional state am I in? Like, what thoughts am I thinking? I mean, that's the other thing, like our thoughts stimulate emotions, but then also like our emotions stimulate thoughts. And so it's this interesting interconnected web where like, you know, nothing is separate and nothing is like, okay, this is like the ultimate answer, but it's like finding the entry point for you in every single situation. You know, are you able to have a better thought that changes the emotion? Or is it sometimes just like sitting with the emotion and, you know, making a sound and allowing for it to dissolve, leave you?
It's an interesting answer. The reason I asked you that question specifically is because I've been tracking very closely my emotional states and my HRV, especially over the last few months, just really to see the relationship between just those two things. Obviously, it's very hard to see that relationship in just look at those two things, because a lot of things obviously will affect it. But one thing that I've noticed is when I'm feeling particularly peaceful, joyful, content, grateful, obviously my heart rate variability is a lot higher. But when I'm feeling very excited, I'm very excitable about something, my HRV actually drops a little bit. But I find that really interesting, purely because I don't see excitability as a problem, right? It's not a bad thing. So the reason I kind of bring that up is because sometimes your heart rate variability will be disrupted based on positive emotions. And we don't really like the whole positive, negative, you know, labels to emotions, because they're all there to serve. But I think it's important that people recognize that it's not just a case of when you're in a good mood, then your body, your system is safe, for example, or in that rest and digest state, because actually we can have too much going on sometimes as well, like and this is where I think a lot of like addictions can be created, right? So we're just constantly getting those hits, and at some point you know, our body has to have a come down from it. I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
First of all, super cool that you're tracking this, and I love the self-experimentation. I mean, what I'm seeing in this is that this whole kind of like good or bad, it's not that like high HRV means like you're rocking it. It's ultimately, you know, being flexible in it. And I think what you highlighted there is that the level of excitement. I mean, what is excitement? Excitement is a state of activation. It's like you're getting ready to freaking do something because you're like excited about doing it. And obviously, I mean, if you're getting ready to do something, I mean, your HRV is moving more into a space of positive stress. Because it's like, obviously you are stepping into something, you know, you're not just like lounging back, but you're activating. And I think that's also a really, really interesting and important piece, is that the numbers don't really tell you necessarily the truth. It's always like, have the numbers as a guidepost and then check in with yourself. You know, yeah. Sometimes my system tells me like, oh, you know, you're like really stressed. And sometimes it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, I am really driving myself like really freaking hard. But then in other moments, it's like, yeah, I'm super fucking excited. And that is why like it looks like that. And so like there's not really like any truth basically outside of you. It's all areas that can inform. And it also really highlights, I think what's important is that our physiological response to basically like fear or excitement, it's effectively the same thing. Yeah. But one is, our mind puts a negative spin on it, and it's like, oh man, this outcome is going to be horrendous. You know, I'm going to be suffering afterwards. While the other one is like, wow, this is going to be really, really cool. And I'm going to like have a like positive experience. And so I feel that again highlights the complexity of the interaction between what our physiology does and then sort of the extra layer on top that we interpret. Is it going to be positive or is it going to be negative? You know, is it going to be something that's expansive or something that's contractive?
Yeah, nice.
It's funny because ever since Charlotte started tracking her HRV, I started tracking mine, but through the practices I do, which obviously elicit emotions as well. So it kind of all combines anyway. But I usually do daily ice baths first thing in the morning. Like in the morning, I love doing ice baths. So really bring my nervous system back into balance, bring me into a good resourceful state. I've just recently switched to doing them in the evening instead of the morning to see how that would affect my sleep and my HRV. And this morning, I wake up, I felt good, had a good night's sleep. I checked my HRV. It was probably at the highest it's ever been. And I have an ice bath about 3 to 4 hours before I go to bed. And it's never been, my numbers have never been that high in my HRV, and my heart rate has never been that low as well at the same time. And I did feel recovered. I felt good. But I remember there's other times where I used the other practices, whether it could be meditation or breathing, and then I'd wake up in the morning and my HRV would be high, but my heart rate would be high, and I'd feel like rubbish. So how do you tell from the data, from like looking at HRV, looking at heart rate, whether you're obviously, we always listen to ourselves first and how we feel. We always know that's more important because your body knows. But if you're collecting data and you're looking for patterns and how do you interpret that data if you see of HRV, heart rate, and to determine kind of where your nervous system is sitting at that moment, and if you're recovering well or not?
I mean, on the question like whether you're recovering well, it's really you basically look at, so before you do exercise, you know, you have a certain like heart rate variability, and then you do exercise and it basically drops almost to zero because you're ultimately, I mean, depending on the intensity of the exercise. But then as soon as you stop your exercise, you know, does your heart rate variability jump back up to where it started before you did the exercise? And if it does, then it means you're like well resourced and you're able to recover well. If you're in a state of like burnout and basically, you know, you start somewhere, you do exercise, and it takes a whole bunch of time until you get back to the level that you were on previously. But then again, it comes down to, and that's why it's really about like HRV coaching, because I mean, obviously from the numbers you can see a pattern, and then you can, you know, bring up a question. But it's in the dialogue, you know, where basically the awareness is created. And so that's why I see heart rate variability, or any wearable tech for that matter, it's an enabling technology. It's not God, you know, it's not like you do the data and then you know what's going on. It's an interesting experiment, I think, would be to because I mean, I'm using also like Wellbeing, for example, as a like HRV tracking app. And then it gives you in the morning, like, okay, this is like how you should kind of go about your day. And I think an interesting experiment would be like, if you totally discouple like what they tell you from like the data, you know, and then, you know, you tell one group, oh, you're going to have an amazing day. Because I think there's sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in some way, you know, this whole heart rate variability thing, it's a bit like magic. You know, it's a bit like a black box. And then, you know, depending on obviously, you know, how much faith you kind of put into the thing, I feel it really has an ability to change how you're engaging with the world. Whether it's like, oh, today I need to have a rubbish day, and that's why, you know, I'm consciously or unconsciously kind of like sabotaging things. Or, you know, today it told me I'm gonna have an amazing day, and that's why I'm just stepping into like all the opportunities that arrive.
I'm really glad you said that. The reason I asked that question is I've seen so many people get so kind of go right down that rabbit hole when it comes to analyzing data from wearable tech. And like exactly what you said is they all wake up in the morning, they feel great, they look at the data, and then the data says, oh, you've had a rough night, take it easy. And then all of a sudden, whew, physiologically, mentally, they just drop. And like they feel, oh, I am feeling a bit tired or feeling a bit stiff. And then again, it's that perception. Is they buy so much into what the data says, they start believing it, and they start to create that physiological response. So I think it's important for anyone listening to this is if you're tracking anything, remember it's a guideline. It's not the be all and end all. It's like you said, it's not God. It's a guideline. Go based on how you feel. We always do. We say, how do we feel first before we check the data? And then when we
right.
check the data, and there are sometimes where like we use Aura Ring when we track our sleep and stuff, and we wake up and we feel great, and we check it, and then they think says, oh, like numbers are low. Are you feeling okay? Take it easy today. You know, have a rest day. And I go, yeah, no, that doesn't feel right. This is I'm not going to listen to that, because it's you've got to go on how you feel, because it's not like you said, it's data. It's not 100% accurate. It's not 100% infallible. So it's important for anyone to realize, if you are tracking anything, is please ask yourself first, how do you feel? And then don't believe what the app says every single time. It's like, if it contradicts how you feel, then that doesn't mean the app's right. It doesn't mean your data is 100% correct.
And I think it comes back to also Charlotte's point, you know, where your body system, depending on how you contextualize your physical experience, it can go, yeah, oh no, I'm really like feeling anxious about something. Oh, I'm just really excited.
Yeah.
And from a numbers perspective, it looks the same, but the interpretation is
different.
And so I feel it's really about the sense of like sovereignty.
Absolutely. It kind of goes back to how we started this conversation, right? And your journey is like, you decided it's time to go inwards to really find out what's going on, right? And it's the same thing, just talking about it in a different way. And it's interesting because when we work with our clients, you know, obviously every client's different, but again, there's patterns, and often people are struggling to perhaps articulate how it is they feel and what exactly is going on, and when they're in those times of stress or burnout. And we then start to track their data without actually telling them what it means, unless they're like super interested in it. And initially it's just a case of, okay, this is the, so we actually send them an Aura Ring or some kind of tracking device, and then we look at that data as they're going through their coaching journey with us, and we can start to recognize when they are becoming more in tune and when they're not. And it's very, very interesting because of the discrepancy in the beginning. It's like not recognizing, okay, what activity is triggering this, what's actually remedying how I'm feeling, what's their quality of thinking being like, their emotional state. Because we know, like, we can't be with our clients all of the time, but we know when they're perhaps doing their practices or not, and this kind of thing based on their data. But there comes a turning point within their coaching journey where they start to recognize, without even looking at the data, this is the thing that's working for me, this is the thing, and they get more and more tuned in. And I just find that interesting because we get to see the data side of it, and then obviously we make sure they're aware of it so they can track it for themselves and see the correlation. But it's a real good kind of progress check, and you can really see how far somebody's coming along as well when they start to connect those dots of what's going on with their physiology versus their perception, because there can be such a big gap sometimes.
Yeah, it's beautiful to hear that enabling, because I feel that's exactly like where tech makes sense. You know, like have kind of a dialogue with that component. It's basically the same as like having a dialogue with another human being, you know, and they reflect something to you that you don't see about yourself. I mean, that's why, for example, like mastermind groups are, I feel like, really powerful. Because in some way we're all sitting in our own little like glass jar and can't read the label from within. But then somebody from the outside can say like, look, this is like what I see. And then there as well, you know, it's really important to be clear, like, is this person just projecting their own thing, or are they really fully seeing me for who I am? And it's always that, I feel, dialogue of having your sovereign experience. And I mean, obviously, you know, like having all sorts of like information sources to inform ultimately the connection with like, who am I? And like, what is it that makes it me? And like, what am I here to do? And really, you know, as we say in Buddhism, you know, like the first relationship that you have is the relationship with yourself. And then the relationship with like anybody around you, your kids, your loved ones, and them.
So let me ask you this, Tobias. What's the correlation that you perhaps see with the big question of who am I and stress?
I feel stress arises for me when I am disconnected from who I am. And, you know, it's again, it's coming back to the attachment and authenticity thing. As long as my attachment is to something outside and I need to sacrifice my authenticity, then there is like stress. But as soon as I'm able to realize, or I can attach to myself, or I can attach to my authenticity, boom, you know, you solve the riddle. And I mean, my grandpa was always saying this thing, and I never understood it until like maybe a year ago or something. He was always saying, you know, like water has a pointy head. And it's this thing, like water is relentless, you know, it will always find a way, and it grinds down the stone, you know, it makes it nice and smooth and round. But it's also the thing, you know, like water, like, you know, it will find its way, and if you're able to guide it, you can, you know, channel it towards mills and make bread and flour to like feed your people. But if it's like uncontained, you know, it's like massively destructive. And I feel that's the thing for me, where I'm seeing more and more that there's sort of these undercurrents that I'm kind of latently aware of that I kind of want in my life. And unless I'm stepping consciously towards it, they will happen kind of so like anyway. But if I'm not stepping consciously towards it and actually maybe have a hard conversation about, okay, this is actually what I want, rather than, you know, going with what somebody else expects of me, then it creates a sort of like victim state, rather than, all right, my desire is going in this direction, and I'll communicate that to somebody else, potentially risking the severing of the attachment with that person for the sake of allowing myself to actually attach to that higher vision in some way.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. And it's interesting because when you perhaps take the decision that is pleasing other people instead of your own path, it creates tension inside the body, right? And when we're tense inside the body, we're not living authentically, right? And then we go into that whole, we're contracted, we're unsafe, the body now is in stress state. So when we actually relax, we can actually be more of our authentic selves. But what I find interesting is that both paths can create tension. It's just one is like short-term tension, like you said, like have that perhaps difficult or tricky conversation that's going to get you what you want, or keep quiet and go with the herd. Essentially, you know, you're going to live under chronic tension for as long as it is you keep swallowing what it is you really want. And I think for me that was something I didn't realize until I would say late on my journey, really. Is just the role that being authentic plays in stress, in growth, in your ability to actually grow and learn and heal. And I just think the majority don't ask themselves that question enough. Like, who am I? What is it I want? Because I for sure was kind of raised on, no, this is what we do, right? You grow up, you get married, you have 2 kids, you stay in the same town, like you get yourself a secure job, and like there was nobody ever saying, what do you want? Right? And then when I started to ask that question, naturally I started to live more authentically. I started to feel more at home within my own skin. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on that.
100%. I mean, I have goosebumps when you were speaking about it, and stories of this sort of cosmic orgasm, you know, like truly spoken. It's I feel such a big journey for me as well, that level of living authentically. Because yeah, it does take courage, you know, it does take courage to have these like difficult conversations. And it also does take courage to potentially, you know, stand alone. And especially I feel, since there's always this talk, you know, the human species is a species that is like, it's tribal. And I feel, yeah, true to some degree. But if we focus too much on sort of like the tribal component, then we're effectively kind of sacrificing part of our authenticity by design. And so I feel it's really that balance again, you know, like having the courage to stand on your own and being connected to like who I am. And at the same time, yeah, being obviously with this tribal community, because I mean, they again inform like who I am. And I would say like every single interaction I had in this lifetime helped me to understand more of who I am. But it's this kind of, I would say like never-ending journey as it feels, because with every step I take, I'm beginning to again see more. And I mean, in some way, it's really fun because it's this exploration. You know, it's never ever getting boring. And the big piece is as well for me. So on Sunday I was sailing, for example, and it was like quite wavy. And it's been really interesting because I mean, obviously, like in this small boat, I'm just by myself, you know, I'm basically like needing to rely completely on my own ability to like maneuver and to, you know, keep myself safe in that sense. And then so going through these like dips and kind of like over these waves, I felt at moments like really afraid and felt like, but then it was interesting. I was like, man, actually, let me be curious what this feeling feels like. So instead of feeling afraid and feeling, oh no, I shall turn back to like where the other bunch are sailing, or maybe like go back to the shore. I started like breathing into it, and then suddenly, boom, 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 it just like dissolved. Or when I was going to Germany, I was afraid of like, oh, I only got like 2 hours of sleep, and you know, maybe I like missed something. And so I was kind of like afraid of like messing up the journey. And then again, I luckily had this awareness of, let me feel what this feeling afraid feels like. And again, boom, it just dissolved. And I was like, it's actually really good to be alive. You know, and it's good to feel these things. And then so it's this level of beginning to realize that fear is really the pathway. You know, like one of my mentors a long time ago said, that always lean into what makes you feel afraid, and kind of like fear being in a way that flashlight that guides you on the path. And it is like wherever is the fear, it's like where's the contracted energy. And when I can lean into it and, you know, have a practice, like breathe into it, and it comes back to being a kid, you know, like as a child, you just express, you know, like whatever emotion comes, you laugh, you cry, you like express your anger, you know. But then as an adult, or like if I kind of like through the programming in some way, it's like, okay, don't be too happy, don't be too sad, like, you know, temper your anger, and then I think that's really where like the unauthentic self comes through, because it's like, okay, I'm holding and holding and holding and holding more, and then like every little drop, you know, triggers basically this like whole barrel full of like past energies. And so I mean, I feel what Jonathan, you were saying as well, the shaking, or having some sort of practice to basically like every day, you know, like drain that barrel a little bit, so that at some point you can do this clear channel again. And then it, you know, hardware variability wise, it allows you to just be more responsive, because if there's a little drop coming in, you can deal with it. It's not necessarily like making this like massive barrel burst, but it's like, okay, cool, it's a small drop, and I will be able to step into it and resolve it, and boom, you know, move on.
It's so interesting to me that you use the sailing analogy, only because right now I'm doing a bit of a kayak challenge myself. So I'm kayaking around 3 islands, which is 150 kilometers in a short space of time, and I'm out there in the ocean practicing. I'm out there on my own most of the time, and when I first went out there, I was like quite scared. I was like, I'm just gonna go to those rocks. And I'm saying to John, if I'm not back in like 30 minutes, come and find me. Walk down the beach, come find me. And what I realized is like, it is that feeling, right? Like you said, it's that you're being faced with a fear. It's like, what are you gonna do with it? So like slowly I'm like creeping to get to the rocks. I'm like, okay, next time I'm gonna go beyond the rocks. And then later on, like in obviously going further distances, like you get over that pretty quick when you realize how far you went versus how far you've actually got to go on the challenge. And what was quite interesting is that now I'm out there where there's like these huge waves, and yeah, it still freaks me out sometimes because some of those waves can really tip me. And now I'm out there like literally going like woohoo, like, and I'm really enjoying it, like, and I'm really just like, what's my alternative? I'm out here alone, the waves are this big, I need to make it back. So what am I going to do? Am I going to freak myself out right now, or do I just go with it and enjoy it? And it's far more fun to just go with it and enjoy it, that's for sure. So I love that you shared that.
And maybe one thing on this is that even if you capsize, you know, you know that you get back up. Or like even like the sailboat capsizes, I know, okay, whatever, I just swim around, stand on this like dagger board, boom, the thing is back up. I mean, I'm wet. But cool.
Wet anyway, in a kayak, you're not necessarily sailing.
Like the boom hits you over the head or something. It's a little bit of pain. But it's interesting because there was this one quote about birds, you know, like the bird doesn't trust the branch that it sits on, but it trusts its wings. And I guess that's exactly the piece that I feel for me comes through when I'm doing like water sports or like hiking in nature. It's this level of self-reliance of, wow, if something goes wrong, I will need to find a way to figure it out. And then, you know, if you had a few of these experiences where you have figured it out, it just builds that level of self-trust. It's like, yeah, fucking bring it on, man. You know, I'm ready.
That's for me the definition of confidence, really. Your trust in your own ability to figure things out. I think if you've got that, I think your confidence is like on it.
Exactly, because we've all got the answers. We all know how to figure it out. We just need to trust that we can figure it out, because I think that's the biggest thing that most people just don't believe in themselves anymore when it comes to that. Which is kind of why I want to. The next question I want to ask you is, based on what you know now, who you are right in this moment, if you were given the opportunity to go back in time to your younger self, to your child self, what would you say to them? What would you say to your child self? based on everything you know now, based on who you are now?
It's always working out, you know, and like that every experience is just a stepping stone to the next one. And it's interesting because I do this like same practice like going forward, you know. I sometimes become my 40-year-old self, you know, and then just look back and be like, dude, you're freaking rocking it, you know. It's a little
Nice.
tough maybe, but you know, you're on the path, brother, and it just feels really, really nice, you know. And I mean, in that sense as well, you know, I feel having that multi-dimensional experience of oneself, like, yeah, cool. But there is a part of me that's here. It's part of me that I know like what's coming. There's part of me that has passed, and it's all in a way fluid, you know. I mean, my future self can evolve, and my child self can evolve depending on, again, what life state am I in? You know, am I a sort of like in fear or hunger, or am I in a state of, you know, enlightenment and Buddhahood or whatever? You know, and it basically just changes the vantage point.
And it's surprising how much wisdom there is when you go backwards and forwards like that. Like when I was doing a lot of kind of inner child work, all of a sudden, like the 90-year-old version of me was there. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And I'm like, there's younger me, like age 5, age 9, and that was me now. And then all of a sudden there's 90-year-old me. And I'm like, what is happening? But there was so much that came from that, so much healing, so many lessons, so much trust, so much faith of what's to come. So I think anybody's listening, I kind of almost forgot that we didn't that we had an audience then. But anyone that's listening, if you're curious about some of the things that we're speaking about, I think the key is just to start reflecting and start asking yourself, like, how it is you're feeling. Who is it you think you are? Who is it you think you are versus who it is you're being right now? Who is it that's perhaps needing some support right now? Who is it, or what part of your life or your journey do you feel like needs some of that wisdom from younger you or older you, or external support? Because I think it's essential to ask those questions as soon as possible in life, I believe. It took me a long time to answer.
It comes back to this piece around stress. Because I mean, what we just spoke about is it's almost that there is this kind of trajectory in some way, and it's kind of like our, let's say, kind of like optimal self, and then, you know, there's our actual self, and like the bigger the gap between like our actual self and like what our path really could be in our sort of like highest state of being, I feel that is where the stress comes in, and so finding that level of alignment, that level of coherence within oneself. And I feel also for me, stress is this when the head, the heart, and your gut is like like all over the place. But then like once there is more, okay, I'm thinking it, kind of using my head to kind of like project out the vision that I have received sort of like from my heart and sort of like my gut intelligence. And so I feel well-being really comes when we are really in harmony with ourselves, you know, when like our sexual energy and our intuitive energy and our relational energy and our like visionary energy all are kind of like ding 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 ding, kind of like the ducks in a row in a way, you know.
I would just add to that is like, I think stress are the clues obviously to then tell you that things are not dinging in alignment, right? It's like the stress is the clue to say, hey, something's going on, something's bringing you off the track to bring you back onto the track. What is it that we need to learn here? What is it we need to experience to bring ourselves back into that sense of harmony? Because stress gets a bit of a bad rap, right? That it's this terrible thing, but actually it can be the biggest lesson, can't it?
Definitely. And that's kind of the question I wanted to go into, ask you, is it
one more thing on the stress piece? And because I feel it's really beautiful how you said that, Charlotte, because being grateful for stress, it's a bit like in mechanics, you know, when you have like these systems and kind of like control systems, you always have kind of the delta between like, this is the signal as it should be, and this is the signal as it is. And without the delta, there would never ever be like any movement. Yeah. And so actually being grateful for stress as, yeah, this correcting force in a way is an amazing frame to actually use.
Definitely. And if you had to give one piece of practical advice to anyone who is experiencing stress and in that whole kind of perception and mindset of, oh my God, everything's going so bad in my life right now, I'm stressed to the max.
They're not so grateful for it.
Yeah, they're not so grateful for the stress. What would you say to them? Like, what would be their starting point? What one piece of practical advice could you give them to help start them on their journey to better understanding stress and helping them to become more aligned?
I feel it's really in a dialogue for me, you know, whether it's dialogue with like somebody you trust, or whether it's in dialogue with, you know, the wearable tech system of your choice. But it's ultimately, you know, like, start sharing that you're stressed. And I feel that is in many ways the key to dissolving it, because like once we start sharing and realize, okay, we're not alone, it kind of like takes the shame out of the experience. It creates stress, it creates connection, which allows us to basically move away from any sort of like addictive behaviors. And just by realizing that, okay, it's a part of life, it's kind of the first step. And then from there, just see how it goes. You know, maybe it develops into a friendship with this person, and then kind of like deepens it through the vulnerability. And in that sense, feel connectivity already allows us to feel in a way less stressed, because our knowingness that we are able to survive is already present by engaging with these tribal dynamics that we certainly have as well.
That's so interesting that you added that there as well, because one of the things I've noticed since tracking my HRV in a lot more detail is that on those days where I would say like deeper connections with friends, with family, whatever, strangers even, on those days my HRV is optimal. That is not a coincidence. Guaranteed. I then obviously look at the emotions alongside that, but the emotions are different, but the connection is the consistent piece that keeps HRV optimal at that point. So I don't think connection, I mean, obviously what's been going on with COVID and such has highlighted how important connection is, but I think not just from a mental health perspective, but from a physiological space as well. I think we don't give it enough credit when it comes to well-being.
Absolutely. I mean, just having a hug or just a physical touch, you know, it totally changes the game. And I mean, you know, there were these like really interesting experiments during like the time of Nazi Germany, when they basically, you know, they took infants and they fed them, but they didn't touch them. And one after another, like these little humans just died, because it's not enough to be fed. It's like you need to be touched. And, you know, as it goes for kiddos, it goes for like adults. Unless we have that level of like physical touch that releases oxytocin and all these like beautiful chemicals, it feels like we're like isolated, you know, and isolation is, I mean, there's studies, you know, it's like as bad for you as smoking and things like that. And it's really, really interesting. And I feel, especially in our Western world, that just don't touch each other enough. You know, there's almost this kind of weirded outness. It's like, man, you know, just like, let's embrace one another and actually have a connection that goes beyond the spoken word to actually feeling, you know. And it's again, you know, like, how am I feeling myself? Can I feel the other person? I mean, it goes all the way into like the sexual space. And I find giving yourself basically the experience of like all these levels of who you are is so important to find balance.
Yeah, there's so many different levels of connection. I've been studying Tantra, and they obviously speak of the different levels of connection, right? We have the connection of essentially a stranger, for want of a better term, a family member, a friend, obviously then a partner, then multiple partners. There's so many different layers of it, and it's just so interesting because, like you said, like now people want to give you like a handshake, right? Like with everything that's gone on, how do you ever like then get to enjoy the pleasures that come from deeper connection and more expansive connection? I guess it's just a case of being open and being willing to be vulnerable and put yourself out there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I feel being clear again, like what it is that you need. And also, you know, being willing and supportive for others' needs. And I feel that's, again, we're in some way, you know, like as humans, we are kind of like medicine for one another. But at the same time, also, I feel there's a lot of things that we can give ourselves. I mean, for example, just having that kind of stroking down your neck, it's super calming for your nervous system. And, you know, you don't need to have a partner or a lover or somebody do it for you and basically make yourself dependent on that other person. And then, you know, you feel like stressed because you need to like find some sort of like trait that you can have in order to get what you want. It's like, look, like what are the things that you can serve yourself with? And then what are the other areas we can just openly ask. And if person A doesn't give it to you, then go to person B. And if they don't, then go to person C. You know, there is no shortage of support in some way. It's simply, again, it comes back to the courage of being willing to make yourself vulnerable, put yourself out there and say like what you want.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you know, giving to people when they come to you, when you're able to give, to meet their needs. And so it's this cycle of reciprocity in some way, you know, like generosity in giving and gratitude in receiving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, nice. So, Tobias, what would I use? Obviously, when we, as kind of society, human beings, we tend to kind of get into wearable tech or do these practices and wanted to release stress and do all this stuff because we want to feel better, we want to feel more optimized, we just want to show up better with more energy, want to be healthier, we just want to be well, basically. So, but I think a lot of people don't really understand what being well means. I think they're so focused on what they don't want, they actually forget to stop and ask, what is it that they want? What does it look like to actually be well? So what, in your opinion, is it to be well? What do you think it means to be well?
To me, wellness is this state of like inner alignment, where my thinking is in alignment with sort of the connections I'm having with the intuition that I have. And yeah, also like my sexual creative energy, so that it all feels coherent. And I feel in that sense, being well also means to put the connection with yourself and the exploration of yourself before like anything else. And that means, you know, taking ownership of like all the amazing, wonderful things that you experience, but also taking ownership of like all the like really dark, painful, like hurtful things that you experience. And I feel by having that absolute self-responsibility and curiosity for oneself, then I feel that is really where health arises.
I love it. Also, if anyone's listening to this and they're listening to this conversation, they go, "Oh my God, they're just finding everything insightful." They're going, "Oh my God, I'm resonating with this. I'm really connecting with this, and I want to start working on myself. I want to start tracking basic data to see how I'm sleeping, how my HRV is, how I'm doing, how well I am from a data perspective." What have you got, like a top recommendation of wearable devices that you would recommend? Maybe like a top 2 or 3 or even more?
And for like an everyday person,
But yeah, for the everyday
might be, you know, in a busy job, kids don't know whether they're coming or going.
Yeah, where's a good starting point for them?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on if you already have like an Apple Watch, for example. I'd recommend to download the Wellbeing app, and then it basically gives you a whole bunch of cool things. I mean, you can even download the Wellbeing app without an Apple Watch, and then kind of on your camera, you just put your finger on, and then it reads your HRV and gives you a little bit of insight.
Interesting.
That's interesting.
How accurate is that?
Pretty sweet, actually. I like it, yeah.
Can't be doing that.
I mean, the other piece I really say is just like get one of these like HRV chest belts, and it's like medical grade like analysis, but made in a way that it's really super digestible. You know, you get basically a whole bunch of numbers, and you get an image, and you can just basically look at the image like every day if you want to be like, okay, cool, I'm doing better than yesterday. And it's again, you know, being in sort of the competition with yourself if you want.
Yeah. And
I would say those are really the top 2, and then potentially the third is having this little it's called foci, but it has more. It's particularly like when you say you're busy individuals, it really gives you a insight into your emotional state while you're doing work or while you're doing like something sedentary that's not conversational, because it basically tracks your breathing patterns. And, you know, it says like, okay, you're distracted, you're stressed, you're in flow, you're focused. But yeah, I think the best piece is the Autonomous Health kit, to give you some real solid understanding. And if you just want to start dabbling, then get Wellbeing, and you can go.
It'd be great if you could send us over the links to all of those so we can put them in the show notes for anybody as well. That'd be awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So Tobias, I really enjoyed this conversation. This is
me too.
For me, when we start talking about things like wearable tech, I'm oh my God, like, is this going to be like, how's it going to go kind of thing? Because, you know, it can get a bit dull. I'll be honest. For me anyway, personally. I like the data, but, you know, when I'm listening to a podcast, it can get a bit dreary at times. You know, even when I've tried to do research on certain things, you know, I have to be entertained by a bit. But what I really love though is the holistic way in which you approach it, and the way in which you use it, and where this conversation has gone, I think is really powerful, again, for our listeners to understand that it's not you do this one thing and then you're going to get this data, right? There's so many layers, right, to our human experience. And you know, wearable tech can be a great entry point. It could be a great progress point. It can really help you leverage your performance and your well-being in so many different ways, and it's got its place. But there'll be other people listening to this that might just be taking the piece of, oh, I didn't realize that my emotions took me out of harmony. You know, there's so many facets to this conversation. I really, really enjoyed, Tobias. So before we wrap it up though, is there anything else you feel like our listeners need to know or hear from you? Any final words of wisdom?
It's effectively, it's about the breath. You know, I mean, the breath is your tool, and any wearable tech device, like what it does, it ultimately allows you to be more conscious of how you breathe. So if you're able to just develop that awareness of like, am I breathing quite shallowly? I mean, even with like just doing computer work or having this interview on screen right now, I mean, my focus is on that screen, which communicates with my nervous system. I am too focused on something, that means like there must be some danger, which basically stresses me. So after that, you know, I'm going to step away into the garden and kind of, you know, broaden the perspective. But really the big thing is just breathe and be aware how you breathe. And then, I mean, after that, you know, go invest in tech if you want. But if you're able to just connect with your breathing, and maybe, you know, even just do a little bit of like breath work every day to familiarize yourself, like what does it feel like to actually breathe deeply? And then having maybe even just a few reminders on your phone or calendar that just ask you like, how do I breathe? Just to bring that awareness, so that over time you develop this habit of just checking in with, you know, am I feeding my nervous system with signals for relaxation, or am I feeding my nervous system with signals for like, okay, let's be stressed? And then again, you know, like, use it strategically. If you want to be activated, do a quick breath so that it kind of like fires you up. But then at the same time, if you're coming out of your work mode into, okay, now I'm making lunch or whatever, then do maybe 4 seconds in and 6 seconds out to like slow down, rest and digest. It's all good. Yeah.
Nice.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. Sort of thank you so much, Tobias, for joining us today. It's been great speaking to you. Just so grateful to be able to connect with you and have this amazing conversation. So thank you so much. But before we let you go, where's the best place for people to find you?
Amazing. First of all, thank you so much for having me and being so wonderfully curious and open. It's been really, really joyful for me as well. And yeah, so best places are on embodied.global, which is the website of our company. And then if you want to see all the things, if you have Linktree/happy Tobias Hofmeister, that's that.
Amazing. Brilliant. Perfect. Everybody's listening, go and follow Tobias and see what he's up to in the world. You will not regret it. Okay. So let's call that a wrap.
Yeah, call that a wrap. So thank you again, Tobias, and we're looking forward to keeping this connection and speaking with you in the future.
Amazing. Yeah, same here.